This story was sent by a viewer who wishes to remain anonymous. Many people who heard this story reportedly woke up at night and checked their surroundings. No more talking. Let's start the story. I've spent the last 4 years trying to convince myself that what happened to me out on Millers Creek Road had a rational explanation. My name is Rachel Dunning. Back then, I was just a 26-year-old photographer, driving down winding, forgotten stretches of Harlan County, Kentucky, looking for history hiding in the fog. But what I found out there, it proved to me that some places are left to rot for a very good reason.
I was out there on assignment for a regional travel magazine called Appalachian Roads. My job was straightforward enough. Capture the rural, forgotten essence of the area. You know, old coal towns, empty hollow roads, abandoned architecture. But what I captured, what I saw, it completely upended my life. I've tried therapy, I've tried logic, but every time the sun starts to set and the shadows get long, I am dragged right back to that cold, rotting room and to the impossible thing I caught on my camera.
The weekend actually started perfectly normally. I drove down from Lexington on a Thursday, checked into this rundown little local motel, and spent 2 highly productive days shooting out in the crisp autumn air. By Saturday morning, I found it. The absolute focal point of the trip, an abandoned church sitting right at the edge of the tree line. I got brilliant, career-defining photos in that soft morning light. I really should have just packed up my gear and gone home. But photographers, we're always chasing the perfect light. So around 5:30 that evening, I made the decision to go back. I should have listened to Darlene. She was the motel clerk, a heavy-set woman in her 60s with kind eyes. On Friday night, she had looked at my map, tapped a heavy finger on Millers Creek Road, and gave me a warning I'll never forget. There's an old church out there, she told me, red brick, been abandoned since about 1987. Just don't go out there after dark, honey. I assumed it was just standard small-town mythology, a ghost story to scare off the tourists. So I completely ignored her. When I pulled back up to the church that Saturday evening, the atmosphere had completely transformed. In the morning, it was this idyllic, stunning red brick building with a bright white wooden steeple. But now, the sky was bleeding from a harsh gold into a bruised, heavy purple. The light was coming in low through the dense trees, casting these incredibly deep, dark shadows across the rotting wood. It was visually magnificent. So I grabbed my gear and set up my tripod across the road, framing the broken stained glass. That's when I noticed the smell. It wasn't the earthy scent of autumn leaves. It was sharp, wet, and utterly stagnant, like an old stone well that hasn't seen sunlight in decades. I was standing there in complete isolation. The only sounds were the wind in the trees and the water in the creek. But then, from inside the dark, empty church, I heard it. A slow, rhythmic creaking sound. Back and forth. Back and forth. It was perfectly steady. Like a metronome. No stray animal settles on a loose floorboard with that kind of deliberate, calculating rhythm. Standing there in the tall weeds, my heart pounding violently against my ribs, every single survival instinct I had was screaming at me. I literally spoke the words out loud to myself, "Rachel, do not go in that church." But I couldn't stop myself. A sickening, overwhelming curiosity pulled me forward. I abandoned my tripod, crossed the cracked asphalt of the road, and stepped right toward that heavy, dark threshold. The front doors were crooked, hanging wide open on rusted hinges. I squeezed past them, and the second I stepped inside, the air hit me. It was dense and impossibly cold, like walking into a meat locker. The only light left was cutting in long, pale, dying strips through the broken stained glass windows. I reached into my jacket, pulled out my heavy flashlight, my hand trembling, and I swept the beam across the ruined hymnals and the rotting wooden pews scattered across the floor. And then the creaking stopped. The heavy, metronomic rocking just ceased the very moment my light hit the floorboards. Whatever was making that noise hadn't just faded away. It stopped because I entered the room. It knew exactly where I was in the dark. I slowly pushed the beam of my flashlight toward the back of the room. At the very edge of the light, deep in the shadows of the far left corner of the last pew, someone was sitting there. An old woman in a dark, heavy dress. She was completely motionless, her head bowed, her hands folded neatly in her lap. My voice shook terribly as I called out, asking if she was all right. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, she raised her head. Her skin was the color of chalk. Her hair was wispy and white, but her eyes, they were completely blank. Solid, milky white spheres with absolutely no irises or pupils. And then she smiled.
It was a wide, slow smile that kept stretching, pulling the skin of her face much farther than humanly possible. It wasn't an expression of joy. It was a grotesque, terrifying imitation of human emotion, like something wearing a mask it didn't quite understand. Pure, blinding panic seized my chest. I didn't even think. I just turned and sprinted wildly into the pitch-black night, throwing myself into the driver's seat, hammering the gas, and fleeing without ever once looking in the rearview mirror.
I sped straight back to the motel, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grip the steering wheel. I burst into the lobby, breathless and terrified, and demanded Darlene tell me who the old woman in the church was. Darlene just slowly lowered her magazine, the color completely drained from her face. "Honey," she whispered, "there's no old woman out there. There hasn't been a living soul in that church since 1987.
She told me the dark history of that rotting building. The church shut down permanently over 30 years ago when the local pastor passed away suddenly. But that wasn't the horrifying part. The pastor's mother, who Darlene said had gone completely out of her mind with grief, died that exact same week, and they found her body sitting right there in the church, in the very back pew, the exact spot where I had just seen that smiling thing in the dark.
I didn't sleep a single second that night. I kept every single light on in that tiny motel room and fled Harlan County the very moment the sun came up. But the nightmare followed me. A few days later, I tried calling the motel to ask Darlene more questions to try to somehow make sense of it all. Another clerk answered the phone. Darlene Marsh, the one who warned me, the one who knew exactly what was out there in the dark without ever needing me to describe it, had passed away in her sleep on October 19th. That was just 5 days after I checked out.
But there is one final piece of evidence. One thing I absolutely cannot explain away with logic, or grief, or exhaustion. When I finally got back to Lexington, I forced myself to review the digital files from the shoot. I pulled up the wide exterior shot of the church, taken at exactly 6:47 p.m. That was before I heard the creaking, before I ever stepped foot inside. It's a beautiful shot of the purple sky, but when you zoom in on the far left window, the one with the broken red-stained glass, there is a pale figure standing there, looking directly out at me. It had been watching me the entire time I was setting up my camera. I stare at that photograph, and a cold dread just washes over me. What exactly was waiting for me in the dark? Was it the residual spirit of a grieving mother who died 30 years ago? Or was it something else entirely? Something ancient and awful that just mimics human form to lure you inside? I haven't photographed an abandoned building since that day, and I refuse to be outside when the autumn light begins to fade. Darlene was right. There are some hollow roads you just don't travel after nightfall. If this story chilled you to the bone, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to like this video, share it with anyone who loves a good scare, and subscribe to our channel for more dark, immersive Moving on to the next one. This story was sent by a viewer who wishes to remain anonymous. Just thinking about that night still makes him feel cold inside. No more talking. Let's start the story. Hospitals are, well, they're supposed to be the ultimate fortresses of logic, aren't they? Built entirely on data, biology, and strict, unyielding laws of science. But what happens when those laws just bend? We're diving into a highly documented, deeply chilling case file from Ridgecrest Regional Hospital in California, the night of March 3rd, 2021. This isn't just some campfire ghost story. This is a methodical, step-by-step breakdown of an impossible anomaly, experienced by a highly trained, seasoned medical professional.
The man at the center of this file is Daniel Howe. He's a registered nurse, raised in a household firmly grounded in absolute practicality. I mean, his father was an engineer, his mother a high school science teacher. As Daniel himself puts it, we didn't do superstition in our family, we did facts. He's 31 years old, trained to observe, to document, and to find logical explanations for literally any irregularity. He's exactly the kind of reliable witness you want standing there when things stop making sense.
We're going to break down the events of this terrifying shift into 6 distinct parts. First, the winter night shift itself. Second, the passing of Walter Cho. Third, the timeline of Room 114. Fourth, the unplugged television. Fifth, the shape in the bed. And finally, the coldest room. Let's step into the ward, shall we?
Section 1. The Winter Night Shift.
Picture it. It's early 2021, and the hospital is deep in the trenches of the pandemic. The staff, they're running on fumes. exhausted, short-staffed, just operating on endless grueling overtime. They've settled into this grim mechanical routine, surrounded by a level of constant loss that, frankly, no human being should ever have to get used to. Daniel had actually just transferred to this smaller, high-desert hospital, specifically seeking the quiet of the night shift to reset his life after a tough divorce. The atmosphere there is tense, it's hyper-focused, a literal pressure cooker of exhaustion wrapped in sterile silence.
Section 2. The Passing of Walter Cho.
Before that night, room 114 had sat completely empty for about 2 weeks. Its last occupant was an elderly man named Walter Cho. Walter was a retired mechanic from the nearby Naval Air Weapons Station. He was admitted with pneumonia and, tragically, after 3 weeks on the ward, he passed away on February 18th. Walter was, well, he was incredibly well-liked by the staff. Just a sweet, soft-spoken guy, and his loss deeply affected the nurses on the unit. While he was there, Walter would constantly ask the nurses to leave the small corner television on in his room. Not because there was a specific show he wanted to watch. No, in his own words, it was because the quiet made him feel too alone. This deep-seated fear of isolation made Walter use that low, steady hum of the TV, weather forecasts, local news, as an emotional anchor against the sterile, overwhelming silence of the hospital. Keep that in mind. That psychological anchor is the absolute center of gravity for everything that happens next.
Section 3. The timeline of room 114.
The shift starts at 11 p.m. Daniel takes the handoff from his supervising nurse, Patricia Okafor, and by midnight, the floor is totally silent, just the hum of the machines. But then, at 12:40 a.m., Daniel notices this blue-white flicker coming from the slightly ajar door of the empty room 114. It's a TV, tuned to a local news channel, volume low. He figures, okay, another nurse, Seth, must have left it on. But at 1:15 a.m., Seth walks up to Daniel and asks if he turned the TV on, because it's playing again. The tension slowly builds until 2:50 a.m., when the absolute impossible happens.
Let's look at Daniel's logic here. Earlier, he executes step 1. He checks the remote. It hasn't moved, it's exactly where housekeeping left it. Assuming it's just an electrical glitch or a sleep timer, he moves to step 2. He just turns it off with the remote. Simple, right? But when it clicks back on at 1:15 a.m., Daniel escalates to step 3. He walks into that dark room, ignores the remote entirely, and physically yanks the power cable straight out of the wall outlet. Problem logically definitively solved, or so he thought.
Section 4. The Unplugged Television.
It is now 2:50 a.m. Daniel is walking past room 114 and he stops dead in his tracks because the physical reality right in front of him is utterly broken. On one hand, the power cable is still visibly hanging loose, completely disconnected from the wall. He unplugged it himself, remember? Yet the screen is lit up bright, casting this eerie blue-white glow into the dark, softly playing a weather forecast. He is staring directly at a literal physical impossibility, an electronic device pulling power from absolutely nowhere. He just stands there in the doorway, totally paralyzed. What would you even do in that moment?
Section 5. The Shape in the Bed.
As he stands there staring at this impossible, glowing television, his eyes start to adjust to the heavy shadows of the room, and this cold, crawling dread washes over him. He realizes he is not alone. In a room that had been stripped, sanitized, and completely empty for 2 straight weeks, he sees a still, horizontal shape under the blanket, the unmistakable outline of a sleeping body. There's even the slight rise of a head resting against the pillow, perfectly sized for a small, elderly man. Daniel manages to call out into the dark. "Hello? Is someone in here?" No movement, no response. Just the soft, static murmur of that impossible TV. Heart pounding, Daniel forces himself to reach around the doorframe and smack the main fluorescent light switch. In the dark, illuminated only by the TV, a sleeping figure is so clearly visible under those sheets. But the exact second those harsh, buzzing hospital lights snap on, nothing. The bed is completely flat. The blanket is smooth, tight, completely undisturbed, tucked precisely the way housekeeping had left it days ago. The visual evidence literally vanishes the moment the room is flooded with light. Daniel immediately grabs his colleague Seth, who takes one single look at the room and absolutely refuses to go anywhere near it for the rest of the night.
Section 6. The Coldest Room.
The very next evening, Daniel goes straight to his supervising nurse, Patricia Okafor, and reports the entire thing. But instead of dismissing him or calling him crazy, Patricia just looks at him and says, maybe he just doesn't want to be lonely. Let that sink in.
That perspective shifts this whole thing from pure, terrifying horror into this deep, heartbreaking empathy. It forces us to look at the event not as some malicious haunting, but as the desperate, echoing reflex of an isolated patient just seeking comfort in the noise.
And the evidence didn't start or end with Walter Cho. Patricia actually revealed that the TV had turned itself on back in 2019, right after another patient, Carol Sims, passed away in that exact same room. On top of that, for the remaining 4 months that Daniel worked on that unit, before finally requesting a transfer, Room 114 carried a permanent atmospheric shift. It remained noticeably, unnaturally colder than every single other room in the hallway, even in the dead of the California desert summer, when the heat outside was baking at over 100 degrees. A chilling environmental anomaly that simply never faded.
Today, Daniel Howe only works the day shift in a totally different city. He actually has to sleep with a white noise machine now, because he literally cannot stand the sound of a television playing in a quiet house after dark. This file leaves us with a haunting realization about the immense psychological weight healthcare workers carry, and the lingering imprints of the souls they care for. When a room is finally empty and the lights are turned off, what physical spaces out there still carry the echoes of those who simply didn't want to be left alone? If this case file sent a chill down your spine, please drop a comment, share this video, leave a like, and hit subscribe for more.
Moving on to the next one, this story was sent by a viewer. The incident is so strange that it's hard to tell whether it was real or just a nightmare. No more talking, let's start the story. My name is Caleb Merritt. It was August 19th, 2022, when my girlfriend Jessie, my best friend Marcus, and I arrived at what was supposed to be a place of absolute safety, a family cabin on Lake Junaluska in North Carolina. If you want to understand the nightmare of what happened to us, you have to understand the progression of those few days. You have to understand the peaceful beginning, the creeping signs of trouble, that thing on the dock, the physical scars it left behind, and the dark secret buried at the bottom of the lake.
It all started flawlessly, a complete, unbothered baseline of normalcy.
My grandfather built that cabin back in the late 1960s. It sits tucked 60 yards from the water, completely surrounded by towering white pines. When you're out there, hidden in the trees, nothing in the world feels like it can touch you. It wraps you in this deep, nostalgic, false sense of security. That first day and a half felt like a picture-perfect summer getaway. Friday afternoon was completely peaceful. By Saturday morning, we were out kayaking in the perfectly calm green water. Come Saturday evening, Marcus was grilling chicken, and we were just sitting out on the porch listening to the chorus of frogs. It was the quintessential easy summer trip. But looking back, that baseline of normalcy was already beginning to crack. A slow burn of subtle, terrifying escalation. The first real sign came Saturday night. Marcus was staring out into the dark trees and noticed the water suddenly smelled old. It was a heavy, suffocating mineral scent, like a closed-up basement that hadn't seen sunlight in decades. Jessie and I just brushed it off. But Sunday afternoon brought something worse. Jessie was hiking the North Shore and looked down from a steep, rocky ledge. 40 feet below the waterline, hovering perfectly still in the depths, was a pale, smooth, oval shape. Too big for a fish, too regular to be a limestone rock. Whatever ancient thing was waiting down there, it didn't stay in the water. The tension finally snapped at exactly 2:11 a.m. on Sunday night. I woke up with an absolute, unexplainable alertness. It was that primal instinct kicking in when your sleeping brain registers a predator nearby. Then, the sound began. A slow, rhythmic dragging echoing from the wet ground outside. A long pull, a pause, and then another pull, moving deliberately toward the cabin. I desperately tried to tell myself it was just a black bear, but bears don't move with that patient, terrifying rhythm. I crept into the main room and found Marcus already awake, frozen. We looked out the window, through the trees, toward the rebuilt dock. And there it was, an impossibly tall figure, standing completely still at the water's edge. It was a deep, unnatural pale, the kind of pale that comes from a total absence of light for a very, very long time. We watched in stunned silence, my heart violently pounding in my ears. And then Marcus whispered the words I will never, ever forget. "Kayla, it doesn't have a reflection." The half moon was brightly illuminating the lake, reflecting the dock, the trees, the sky. But directly beneath this towering, pale figure, the water was dark, flat, and completely empty. We didn't hesitate. We ran out the back door, threw ourselves into the car, and sped 20 minutes away into the pitch-black night. None of us slept a wink. The harsh reality of what we escaped hit us on Monday morning, when the sun finally came up. Marcus went back in the daylight to quickly collect our things. He called me from the property, his voice shaking. He checked the dock. The general condition of the dock was perfectly fine. But right at the edge, where the wood meets the water, there were deep, parallel scratch marks. They looked exactly like something with incredibly long fingers had gripped the edge of the wood from below, pulling its massive weight out of the dark water. And that specific section of wood was soaking wet. The rest of the dock was completely dry from a rain this weekend. I had to know for sure, so I brought out a professional contractor to look at the damage. He ran his fingers over the splintered wood and told me it was gouged so deeply it required enormous force. He actually looked at me and asked if there had been a boating accident. Whatever pulled itself up from that dark water was immensely powerful. The sheer terror of that realization pushed me to dig into the history of the area. I needed to know what we were dealing with. And that's when I uncovered the drowned town's secret. The key to the entire nightmare was the year 1913. I discovered that Lake Junaluska isn't a natural lake at all. It is man-made. It was created by deliberately damming a valley in the mountains of Haywood County back in 1913. Before that dam was built, that valley was a dry, thriving community with farms, homesteads, and a small, white clapboard church sitting right at the edge of a meadow. When the dam was finished, it was all completely submerged under cold, dark lake water. I found a historical photograph of that old church, and my blood ran cold. That pale, perfectly regular oval shape Jesse saw hovering 40 feet down, it wasn't a rock. It perfectly aligned with the submerged roof of that drowned 1913 church. Which leaves me awake at night haunted by one terrifying question. What woke up in that drowned valley? The smell of a closed-up basement, the rhythmic dragging, a towering, pale figure with no reflection, tearing deep claw marks into thick wood. After 100 years resting beneath the cold water, something came up from that drowned church to see who was home. And God only knows what else is waiting in the silent, dark depths of Lake Junaluska. If you survived this campfire tale and want to hear more, please leave a comment, like this video, and subscribe to our channel. You can also send us your true horror stories. If you've experienced something terrifying yourself, or if something scary happened to your family members, relatives, or friends, share it with us. Real paranormal experiences, creepy incidents, unexplained events, or any disturbing true story are welcome. Send your true horror stories in this email.